Hi everyone, welcome back to Survivor Series by Survivor Tribe. Survivor Series is a collection of interviews with real-life trauma survivors where we talk about what it's really like to be a survivor, and they chat on their own personal journeys from abuse to healing. They are also doing really great things in the community by giving back and turning their pain into purpose. And if you're susceptible to triggers, please keep in mind that there's highly sensitive content in these interviews. In this episode, I had the pleasure to sit down with Derek Lopez. When Derek was a child, he was raised in a family that exposed him to addiction as well as physical and emotional abuse. In the interview, Derek talks about growing up surrounded by cocaine and alcohol addiction, the hidden effects of emotional abuse, cultivating forgiveness for your abuser, the importance of accountability and self-awareness in your healing journey, breaking the cycle of ancestral trauma, the learning lessons that followed going no contact, how much empathy is too much empathy when it comes to your abuser, and whether or not he feels narcissists can be healed. Derek also shares his top 5 ingredients for healing and what he feels every person who loves a survivor should know. If you would like to connect with and learn more about Derek's company, Stand Up Our Kids, after the interview, you can find links to his website and his social media channels down below in the description. And if you're new to Survivor Tribe and you want to learn how to find your voice and heal after abuse, subscribe to my channel and don't forget to click that notifications bell so you don't miss any new videos when I post them. Now on to the interview. Hi, everyone. Welcome back to Survivor Series by Survivor Tribe. Today, I have here with me Mr. Derek Lopez. Derek is an emotional and physical abuse survivor, founder of Stand Up Our Kids, father of 3, husband to 1, and I've been following you on Instagram for a little while now, and I have to say you might be one of the most positive dudes out there, which I really appreciate. Welcome to Survivor Tribe, Derek.
Thank you. Thank you so much. I appreciate you having me.
Yeah, so like I was saying, I've been following you for a little while on social media, and I'm just so fascinated how after everything you've been through, you've really carved out this own path for yourself and really turned your life into not only what you want it to be, but what you really deserve in life, which I feel all survivors should really be doing with their lives. And I'm also really impressed that you're joining me so early in the morning, your time. For everyone listening, it is 8 a.m. here in New York, and you're what, Derek, in Colorado?
Yeah, Mountain Time, so it's 6 a.m. here.
Wow. Early riser. What time did you get up this morning?
About like 5:30, which was I let the snooze hit a bunch of times. I tried to get up at 4:45, but I had a long night last night. My 3-year-old somehow made it into my bed. So.
Oh, 'tis fatherhood.
Yes, exactly.
Awesome. So I guess, just for everyone who's listening in, can you just give us a little bit of background on what your life was like growing up, where you're from, and the abuse that you endured?
Yeah, so I was born in Miami, 1983. My parents were divorced when I was 2 years old, and in a nutshell, I was basically more or less born into a mistake situation of family of, cocaine party animals in Miami in the 80s, which was a very popular thing in the 80s. If you
for all
were
you
trying
kids
to
out
be,
there listening, us adults would know, but there was an entire show based around it, right? Miami Vice.
yeah, there's a whole show, there's other documentaries around it, but more or less I was kind of stuck in that, born into that, and so really, it was, for me, I always say good and bad because you can't really learn the good unless you experience the bad. So, out of an early age, broken home at 2 years old, and saw a lot of physical abuse, emotional abuse, verbal abuse, things that people don't want to talk about, probably things that you wait as long as you can to admit and face, probably why I'm on this podcast, So, but at the end of the day, you only get one life, and the life you're born into creates your purpose. So it took me a long time to really realize a lot of that, but, I'm excited to kind of dive into it and jump into the story and then how it kind of can help other people.
Yeah, so happy to have you here so you can get that story out. I think it's very important for people to hear it, especially for people out there who may be going through the same thing or have gone through the same thing. It's really great to tune in and see someone that they can identify with. Going back to the abuse, was it the abuse that you endured? Was it both of your parents, one of your parents?
So I had four parents, and there's only one parent in there that technically didn't really fall under the abuse umbrella. That was my dad, but um, my step parents, my mother, you know, a variety of, like I said, emotional abuse, physical abuse. One of those step parents was arrested for physically abusing me. One other step parent was reported to child services. So it was not really one specific event, but basically from when I was born up until I moved out of the house and then even into adulthood. So um, one of the things that I've been wanting to explain more to people, or at least get out in the open and make people aware of, is the psychological and emotional abuse, because those are harder to see, harder to explain, harder to share, harder to connect help and resources on. So
And kind of easier to deny as well, right? Because you
e-
can't see it on someone.
easier, exactly, easier to deny, and likely more destructive, because you can actually, how do I say this? Um, so if you go and physically beat somebody up, anyone around you is not gonna support that and lobby behind that, right?
Mhm.
Um, if you manipulatively, quietly, secretly, emotionally, and psychologically abuse someone, you can still manipulate other people to go against that person you're abusing. So
Hmm.
you can gain more advocates and lobbyists and flying monkeys. So my
Yeah.
point is psychological abuse and emotional abuse can come with um, large amounts of people. So for instance, instead of just having a disconnection with one family member, um, if they're a narcissistic abuser and really strategic, you could have a problem with an entire family.
Yeah, absolutely. Actually, can
With
you,
this,
just for everyone listening who may not be for I mean, you and I are definitely familiar with narcissistic abuse, and familiar with the term flying monkeys, but just for everyone out there listening, can you define
yep.
that for them?
So basically, it kind of does come from the Wizard of Oz, the Wicked Witch, where she does have the flying monkeys. So they send these manipulative spies, these negative information seekers, negative gossipers, and it could be a coworker, it could be a friend, could be a sister, it could be a cousin, and those people more or less are used as tools, manipulative tools, to gain their own interest, right?
Hmm.
And that could mean ruining your reputation. It could mean trying to find out some information to use against you. So it's a variety of things, but more or less they're building their toxic disciples against you, right?
Hmm.
And these toxic disciples have a completely different story than you have. They have a completely different perspective. And they're not coming into your situation with compassion and empathy. They're coming into your situation with a predisposed, preset story, so you don't even have a chance out the gates, right? And that's the part that makes it difficult, is that you're not starting from scratch or square one with all the people in the family. Anyone who knows the manipulated story, anyone who knows the twisted story, anyone who has been drinking the poison, anyone who is a flying monkey is essentially going to be against you. And
Yeah.
so
And I think it's easy
that
for
makes
them
that makes
to,
sense.
oh, absolutely. I think you defined that really well. And I think it's very easy for I feel like it might be very easy for them to get wrapped up in that because when you are, and I suffered through the same thing, a lot of manipulation, narcissistic abuse. When you are the person who is abused, you tend to pull yourself away from the family unit, right? Because you
Yeah.
obviously you want a healthy life, you want to make something of yourself, and you don't want that type of toxicity in your life anymore. So when you're not around and you're not there to defend yourself either, it's also very easy for them to fall into that and start believing what they're being told by the narcissist.
Yeah, and that's the tougher part of letting go is understanding the controllables and the uncontrollables. And when you feel the despair of, oh shit, I lost a brother and a sister,
Mm-hmm.
um, you mourn the death of their spirit for your benefit. If you don't do that, you get stuck. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm.
So, unfortunately, I won't never say this to my stepmom. So basically, my mother manipulated my half brother, my half sister, and my stepfather against me. There are no offenses or problems between my brother and my stepfather. We have no grounds or foundation to be separated or dislike each other. But they have both believed all the stories from my mother, and the same thing from my half sister. So, um, if I don't mourn the death of their spirit in my life,
Mm.
I live with this constant unrealistic expectation that we'll eventually have a relationship when I can't control their judgment. I can't control their mindset. I can't control their perspective of me. Living a life of trying to change their perspective and living a life of trying to change their viewpoint is a really shallow life. And if you're living your
Yeah.
life to try to prove something to somebody, if you're living your life trying to plead your case when there's not even a case, then like
Yeah.
there's not, it's just like inflated nothingness. And that's the part that was difficult for me to overcome. Um, and I'm in a much better place now. I think that was where I got stuck is like, okay, I have all these other family members that I really actually like, I enjoy um, their company. I think they have great strengths and positivities and positivity to offer, and I can't connect with any of that because one person has destroyed it all. So
Wow.
when you come to terms with that, realize it, mourn it. Um,
So do you have any contact with any of your family now?
None of those people, all four of those people have disconnected from me. Uh, it's 4 years now.
Wow.
And I'll tell you, it's much less sad and much more like, hey, there's peace in my life. There might be peace in their life. And I'm, I sit with that. I rest with that. And I'm okay. I'm
Mm-hmm.
okay with that. I really am because when you're in the chaotic situations, when you're in the drama, when you're in the stress, when you're in the abuse, don't you sit there in the corner, like in the dark, saying, oh my God, I just wish I had peace. Anything, anything, anything to have peace
Relief. Yeah.
and relief. Well, now I have peace and relief, and there's circumstances that come with it. There's pros and cons that come with it, but I still have my peace. And I think
Yeah.
that's where a lot of survivors need to get to is like, if you want peace, it's not like perfect peace. It's not like you find peace and then everything else in your life is perfect. You have to give something up. You have to sacrifice something. There's going to be the pros of peace and there's going to be the cons. And you have to really figure out what you want. If you want peace, but you don't have a relationship with your mother, your brother, your sister, your stepfather, well, pick one. If you want a relationship, then go after that. So you have to be very, like, you have to have conviction on what you want. If you want peace,
Yeah.
you have to be okay with it. So that's sorry for the rambling, but I wanted to
No,
kind of
it brings
dive
up
into that.
It brings up a really great topic that you and I have discussed in the past too, and that's making the decision to go no contact. I've spoken with survivors who have gone no contact, some that have tried to work things out with their family, some who have worked things out with their family. It really depends on your situation and what works best for you. Did you make the conscious decision to go no contact, or did it kind of unfold that way?
I made the conscious decision to do that, and I put it in writing. I put in an email. I made
Wow.
sure that I explained that, you're no longer allowed in my life. And it was the first time that I actually implemented boundaries. So a big part of it felt really good because I had spent, previous to that, I had already spent thousands of dollars on psychologists and therapists to really work on all of this. And I said to myself, okay, I'm learning all this in therapy about boundaries, self respect, and being firm with your boundaries and expectations and communicating them. But that was my stage to like utilize everything I learned. I'm like, okay,
Mhm.
like I have to do this. I have to put up a boundary. What the hell am I going to all these psychologists and therapists for and taking listening to their advice and then not implementing a boundary? Like,
Yeah, and you can't heal in the environment that's harmed you, right? So, and I think a lot of people don't
exactly.
understand that when you grow up with that type of psychological manipulation, it's very easy to keep it in your life as an adult,
Yeah,
right?
like you're accustomed to it and you think you need it in your life and you're so used to it and you think it has to be there and you're born in our society, we're born with like this thought of blood over water. The problem with blood over water is that narcissistic abusers is that's their number one tool and excuse and leverage tool to suck you in. That's the
Hmm.
number one tool. I'm your mother. You have to respect me. I'm
Yeah.
your mother. We have to be connected. I'm your mother. Like it
And
and you know what? You know how many people have lived their lives miserably thinking that that's true? And I
yeah,
thought
well, I mean,
about
you have
this.
that outside influence too, where people are like, well, that's the only mother you have, and that's the only father you'll have. And you're like, you know what? Well, they treat me like shit. And
Right,
if I came to, like, say that a friend is saying this to you, and you say, if I came to you and said, hey, I'm dating this person, or I have this friend, and they treat me horribly, what would you say to me? You would
right,
tell me to get rid of them, right?
right,
But for some
right.
reason, when it's family, it's like this blood is thicker than water thing, and it's not true.
It's not true, and it's actually the opposite. Um, it's possibly true in a sense. Not water is thicker than blood, but water is just as valuable as blood, right? So my meaning is that if you just make a regular friend, that person can be just as close to you family wise than someone in your bloodline. And the reason is because you mutually work on a relationship together and you earn it and you build it up and um, you work on it together. You're not just born into this autopilot, right? You're not
Hmm.
born into this autopilot relationship where you're my mother, I'm your son, it's going to automatically work. You have to work on every relationship that's in your life. The person you report to at work, your wife, your brother, your kids, your uncle, like any relationship, your neighbor, you have to work on it. And if you want a good
Yeah.
outcome, and so it's made me better at relationships because you're going to live out, everyone is going to live out their childhood in their relationships and adulthood
Yep.
unless unless they take conscious intentional awareness each and every day to direct it the way they want to direct it. Some people, can consciously go down the same path as that they were put into because it was a good path. They had positivity, love, togetherness, and they're going to follow that path. You and I, born into toxicity, narcissism, abuse. Um, we have to be conscious and change that cycle to work for it, to actually work for it, to change those habits, change the DNA and the thoughts and the
Yes.
habits and all the cycles um, to
You
create a positive life for us. So, You have to work for it regardless of the situation you're in. You have to be conscious of the life you want.
Yeah, I think you made a really good point there too, is that most people think that if they are going to go no contact or they're going to get into therapy or try to fix that problem, they're looking at it as breaking one cycle when you're
Right.
actually breaking like cycles from your family going way back. Like these
Yep.
issues didn't just pop up with one person. They
Yep.
run so much deeper than that. Like did you
Yep.
find that in your family too? Like I guess what I'm most interested in hearing after you went no contact, because going no contact was a completely cathartic experience for me, and you think you know everything, you think you know what the problems are, but when you remove yourself from it, it's like a whole new light is shed on it. Like
Oh,
what
for
did you
sure.
learn? Yeah, what were your learning
So
lessons?
for the last 4 years, I have learned that ancestral trauma
Hmm.
is really what I've focused on. Learning about ancestral trauma has helped me with lightening the situation, helped me with forgiveness, helped me with love towards them. I know it sounds really weird, but periodically in my meditations at night, I have felt little hints of love towards them, which is a really good sign. Um, the problem is like when I feel those signs of love, like immediately another module of my brain like pulls it away
Shuts it
and
down. Yeah.
shuts it down and like protects me. And so, um, the ancestral trauma really is coming from immigration, and I've noticed, and it's created like a appreciation for um, the transition to coming to America. So I'm the second generation from Cuba on my dad's side. So his parents came here in the 50s from Cuba legally, um, but a huge transition culturally,
Hmm.
huge. Think about that. A communist country, very small town on the island of Cuba. And then my mom is second generation from Poland. Um, Her grandmother grew up in Poland in the early 1900s, went through a couple world wars, just really intense poverty, and a really different way of thinking. My mom and my dad really adopted a lot of my grandparents' way of thinking, and they deny it. I've got no contact for 6 months with my dad now, and he has a very judgmental setting to him. But in Cuba, when you have a small village of a couple hundred people and you're in that little section of that village, you know everything that every family's doing. You see them every day. You have 5, 8, 10 hours of exposure to these families, and you have constant space to judge, um, or come to your own conclusions.
Hmm.
And it's not because you're against them, it's actually because you're so connected with them that you're so opinionated about their lives. My point of me saying that is that, yeah, ancestrally and through my DNA, there's a lot of judgment. Where they got that judgment from was actually out of good intention, if that makes sense, right? But um, my mom and my dad just weren't conscious enough to realize it all. So, like, how you analyze a person, how you connect with a person, my parents are extremely judgmental. Um, and the fact that they still, abuse drugs and alcohol kind of like doesn't help them make these
So they're still in
ancestral
the cycle.
connections.
Okay.
Yeah, so they're still in their cycles. So when you're an alcoholic, you're not going to realize these things. So ancestral trauma is something that people who have gone through trauma should really look back and say, okay, well, maybe these people weren't wise enough, weren't intentional enough, weren't aware enough, weren't conscious enough to understand how they learn their behaviors, how they learn their patterns, and
Hmm.
they weren't even conscious enough to change those cycles, right? It's like, hey, this is how you live. You judge other people, and this is a cultural thing. And this, like, my biggest frustration with my dad has always been he would complain that his dad from Cuba would always fuck up. Like he would have to pick up his dad from rehab because his dad, my grandfather had a bad cocaine addiction. And like he would try to fix things, right? And things wouldn't get fixed. And my dad would tell me that he would vent to my grandfather saying, well, I wish you would do this better. Or, why do you do this? Blah, blah, blah. And his dad would respond, my grandfather would respond with, oh, that's just the way I am. You're going to have to deal with it.
Mm.
And one of my arguments with my dad when he was here earlier this year, that was his exact response to me. I
Just the
said, do
way
you
that
not
he
realize?
is. Yeah.
I said, do you not realize what the fuck you just said? Like what? And he didn't. I said, you've been bitching and complaining. My grandfather's been dead like 7 years now. But for 20 years, I've heard that my dad would vent to me, and I'm like, you're following in the same cycle. You've complained about this one major thing for 20 years to me. Oh, every time you want to explain something to your dad, he always says, well, that's just the way I am. That's just the way I am. And we just got in an argument and you said the same fucking thing to me. Sorry for cursing. I don't know if you're like,
No,
but
no, it's totally fine. You're talking. I'm
and
from
I'm
Philly.
like,
It's fine.
okay, okay. And so that was one of the big epiphanies, of no contact. I'm like, I'm trying to change someone and connect with someone who doesn't get it. And if I don't go no contact, I don't hate him. I really genuinely love him. But if I don't go
Yeah,
no contact, I'm going to go insane. And I cannot have these conversations anymore with people who don't have the same level of consciousness, who are on
for
different
sure.
wavelengths. So I'm vibrating up here and he's vibrating down here, and
Yeah,
it's creating a lot of friction. So no contact is pretty deep for me. But if you can look at the ancestral trauma, if you can take a step back and really look at big picture stuff, that will help, in my opinion.
for sure. And I think too, and I've noticed your parents are all boomers, right? I would
Yeah,
imagine. Yeah.
yeah,
So it's funny to hear boomers talk about millennials and their complaints on millennials and talk about how they're vain and, whatever the other complaints are. But is it just me, or do you think that the baby boomer generation, no offense to anyone out there who's listening, but I think that it's important to hear, and I think it's important for all of us to hear and abide by, but I feel like there's almost a lack of self-awareness there.
yeah. I think the lack of self-awareness comes from emotional intelligence and our move towards that as a species, as a society. I think we have more education tools, more information, more communication now with social media and internet, that we're just kind of getting started now on really educating ourselves in a free world. And I think the baby boomers come from TV and newspapers and ideas that were pushed down from big corporations and big government and big media through propaganda bullshit on newspaper and commercials. And it's a very propaganda type culture, right? It's like people, they're you're either left or you're right, and it's very polarized. And baby boomers don't realize it, that they were put up in a very polarized ecosystem, right? It's like
Mhm.
you sit on the couch, you change a channel, you look and watch this one-sided platform you can't communicate with. It's called a TV. We don't talk like that anymore. Our information in our society is not centralized. It's decentralized. Social media has decentralized information. You can learn anything you want. And when you can learn anything you want, you live in a free world. And when you live in a free world, you can make more conscious choices and get better at decision making. And
Mhm.
that's what baby boomers don't realize, is that information leads to better decision making. And it's crazy to me how um, it's a human nature to criticize future generations because it's a fear that they're going to do it better than you. So it's
But that's what you should
safer.
want, right? Like you should want
Well,
the future generations to do it better than you. That's
yeah,
you would think that would be the key, right? Like that would be the end goal is to keep getting better as we go along.
yeah, yeah. And I think baby boomers, have, nothing against them. They were raised on this in this culture of, like I said, again, TV and propaganda commercials, and you know, information was, centralized. And if you had something to say, it was very difficult to get your word out there, very difficult to start a movement, very difficult to do protests. Now, people are pissed off about Trump or whatever, but you have young people, old people, middle-aged people all protesting. My point is that baby boomers really never been had the stage. They can hide. They haven't had the stage to put their opinions out there. And you know teenagers now are going on Snapchat, Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, and putting themselves out there. And we're talking about cyberbullying. Well, yeah, the cyberbullying is just a early stage of our society changing and turning a corner, actually discussing things and having an open forum, and actually like discussing an open forum, which is what democracy is all about. Like that's,
Mm-hmm.
Christopher Columbus. I sorry to get into a tangent here but for a second, like, look, we didn't find the free world to have a boss and listen to one person and have all these authorities over us. We came here to be free to make decisions in an open forum and be able to contribute your ideas to the general marketplace. If you can contribute your ideas to the general marketplace, that means you're contributing. That means you're connecting. That means that you are building community. And that's what democracy is about. You can't build community with a fucking TV sitting in your living room.
Yeah.
You can't do it. So now millennials and Gen X, Gen Y doing what you're doing, what I'm doing. We live across the country, and East Coast, I live in the mountains. We've identified a common topic. We've come together on it, and we've built an audience and a community of people
Mm-hmm.
who want to talk about that. I don't want to fucking talk about who's Republican and Democratic and who's the mainstream like. And that's what baby boomers are raised on, is that type of thinking, like
That type of
mainstream
mentality.
media, and I
Yeah.
know everything. And so I'm not shitting on baby boomers, because I do think it's a great generation. There's so many amazing qualities, but this mindset of emotional intelligence and educating yourself and being a free person,
Mm-hmm.
you got to like open our minds, people. We got to open our eyes and see like there's much more opportunity to be a free person and be a good person.
Yeah, and
And
I think too we have to learn how to really accept each other for the way that we are
totally,
as well, right? Like there are obvious reasons why their generation is the way that it is, and why Gen X is the way that it is, and why millennials are the way that they are. But I think it's all about coming together and trying to find those things that we have in common and trying to connect and accept one another.
exactly. That's what democracy is.
For sure. And I love that you hit on just how, now, you and I can connect and we are putting this message out there for other people to hear. Um, you know, and I've had this conversation with other survivors. I didn't feel like there were a lot of resources out there. And I also hear that a lot of survivors don't feel like they were heard or listened to. You had mentioned earlier in your story about how you had your parents were arrested, right? Or
Yeah.
like it was
Yeah,
reported.
my stepmother was arrested for physically abusing me.
So let me ask you this: how did that come to light? Were you confiding in someone, or did someone see it happen?
My dad was there. He was right there. It was a kind of a dramatic episode. And my half brother and sister were. My brother was like 3, and my half sister was like 6 months. And it was a dramatic situation. Um, and my dad had to call the cops, and you know, it, she was put in a cop car and driven away, and my dad and I were there. Um,
How old were
you know,
you at the time?
it was 12,
Wow.
11 or 12, I think 12. And I never really, once it happened, like I didn't go to a therapist or talk to anybody about it, or I really just buried it and swept it under the rug. And she didn't even apologize to me, and had to, face her. Um, you know, and to this day, my dad's mentioned it a couple times and to her, and she's made comments like, well, I had to get arrested because of him. Yeah,
No.
so yeah, so
Oh, Derek.
so you have to really realize when you have narcissism involved, the ego is so strong it can create this egg, like literally an egg around you, like, and you can't tap in, you can't break it.
Yeah.
They want to protect their ego so bad. They're so frightened of being vulnerable or wrong because they're just so damaged that um, the ego creates this, marble granite shell around you. And
Yeah.
what ends up happening is you don't have empathy, you don't have compassion, and you never end up having a real connection with any other human beings. And I looked at
Yeah.
the people that have abused me, and I haven't talked, to many of them in a while, but that seems to be the trend in their life is that there's no real connection with anyone, with
Yeah.
anyone.
Do you find yourself, because I definitely do at times, like, because I see that common trend in my family unit as well. Like, do you find yourself feeling empathy for them, for the lack of being able to connect with other people because of that?
Um, Now on the other side, now that I have let go and realized it's okay, like you don't have to be so angry about life and be so, um, how do I say, stuck on a thought. And I think, um, yeah, once you get there stuck on a thought, um, if it's an angry thought, you'll take it out on a 12-year-old kid. You'll take it out on anyone. You'll leave a path of destruction. And so, you got to be careful because uh, once someone's damaged and hurt so bad, if they don't get help some way somehow and let it go and overcome it, it's just
Hmm.
going to continue. Just going to continue.
Yeah.
It
Do you,
will. Go ahead.
do you were and I asked this because within my family unit, I was the only one who was abused. Were
Hmm.
your siblings abused as well?
No, so what's crazy is that then I don't think any of them realize the psychological abuse that they've been put through and the exposure, because just exposure and manipulation can be abuse, right?
Yeah.
And emotional abuse. And when you go through these insanity cycles, you can be exposed and you don't even know it. So I don't know if they even know it. And if there was physical or other episodes, I didn't witness it when I was living in those homes as a kid. Um, and I do know that um, there was special treatment to all of them. I was kind of the black sheep because when my parents were divorced when I was 2, they both got remarried when I was like 5 or 6. Both had kids, so there was basically two households, full siblings. Four here, four there, and I was just constantly bounced back and forth between the two. So it was always awkward. It started to feel really awkward when my brothers and sisters were old enough to like realize stuff, have personalities, and interpret stuff. And that's why I had to leave because it was so awkward. It's like, what family do you belong? Oh wait, this family you don't belong here because they abused you. Oh wait, they don't belong. And so it was just like
Yeah.
a real shit feeling that I never really faced till I moved out. Um, yeah.
When you started to speak on it, I mean, when did you start to speak out on it? And when you did people believe you, or did you feel like you were
Well,
constantly defending yourself?
the the only person I've really needed to speak out on about it is my wife. Unfortunately, she's been exposed to a lot of it. But I think as far as like social media and survivors and trying to connect with other survivors, and I'd say like last year I was most comfortable um, with talking about like mental health and Honestly, I think in the last 12 months, I've realized how much more important it is to talk about it because, how do I say, so we're the experts actually. So if we don't create, and I was really thinking about this last night before this interview, is if you don't do more of this, if we don't do more of this, um, and we leave it up to therapists and psychologists, and I'm not hating on therapists and psychologists because I use them and they've given me great, amazing help. Some psychologists and therapists do it because they've been abused, so they're also an expert. Some never been abused and they just really loving and compassionate and good people. And my point is that when you connect with other survivors, when you go through the pain, when you go through the challenges, you're the expert. So connecting with those other experts, like you, connecting with other experts is, I'm not going to say more helpful than a therapist. It's just a different type of helpful. Like
Yeah.
therapists are really good in helping plan, strategize, get perspective, like take a time out and like write stuff like planning, strategizing, like life coaching almost, right? But connecting with people like you and other survivors, other people who've actually been in the shit is a helpful connection to create more empathy, sympathy, compassion.
Mm-hmm.
Does that does that make sense?
100%. There's like
Okay.
also a sense of camaraderie there. And
Yeah. Yeah.
I'll say like till the day that I die, man, I think building a community like this was something I didn't even know that I needed, right? You go through life and then you have obviously the abuse that happens and the people in your family are not receptive to your feelings. And then you meet people throughout life and there could be people that are really there for you and they're your friends and they want to support, but they haven't gone through the same thing, so they don't know what
Right.
it feels like. And then you
Right.
start talking with people who do know what it feels like, and it's a whole other level. It's opened up my mind. It's made me see things about myself that I didn't see before. It's made me feel stronger and more empowered. It's amazing. It's amazing what the like. Do you feel that there's like this huge movement going on right now collectively where people that have been oppressed or held down for such a long time, in whatever regard that is, are starting
Yeah.
to rise?
I do. I do. I feel like I do feel emotional intelligence is on the rise. I feel like um, it's evolution. Humans are becoming more emotionally intelligent. They're becoming more aware, and we have these um, different um, outlets in our society to communicate that. And I really do feel more optimistic about current times than most people do. I know everyone's worried about so many things, climate change and the president and all these horrible things. Humanity's horrible. But I think it's not that. I think it's the opposite. I think we're going in a good direction. I believe in humanity, and I think one of the things we love to do and are obsessed with is communicating. And I think more communicating will lead to more democracy and
Mm-hmm.
more freedom will lead to just more um, positivity for humanity and more gratification for people and more connection. And I think we're going through like a funk right now of realizing what the hell's going on in a transitional generational
Yeah.
change. I hate to say it this way. I don't want to say it this way, but I have to because it's just history and evolution and what we're experiencing right now. We're combing out people, um, dead brain people who don't know what freedom really is. Okay, because freedom is not watching TV, binging on Netflix, and like paying your bills and being a busybody and jumping on the dopamine treadmill and then dying after you
Yeah.
pay all your taxes.
Yeah. Just
That's not
being
what
on that
life is.
hamster wheel. Yep.
On that, exactly. Life is about living out your purpose, contributing, being a free person, and that's what democracy is. And
Mm-hmm.
I feel like democracy and freedom and consciousness have landed a little bit, and we're evolving. And yes, the movement is building up. People are speaking out. People are creating more. Are more are braver because if other people are telling their story and it's getting out there. You're going to be more brave. You're going to communicate more. So yes, I think the movement is growing. It feels so good because um, it is a resource for people. Like, yes, I do go on Facebook groups and collect ideas, read people's stories, comment on people's stuff, ask questions. I fucking communicate. Like, I don't know how else to
Yeah.
say it. Sitting on a couch for 3 hours and watching Sports Center, again, I'm not hating on it. It's just people have to think about what the fuck is going on here.
Yeah.
Like baby boomers are used to sitting on a couch and watching TV, and that's kind of brainwashing. You're not talking, you're not communicating, you're not
Yeah.
actively learning. You're not like this is active learning. Like we're talking, yes, is it digital? Yes, but it's active learning. We're not like being dead mummies, and that's what I
Yeah.
love about that's what I love about the movement is that emotional intelligence is going to continue to rise because
Yeah.
people are going to do more stuff like this.
Totally agree. I'm actually on the same page with you. And I think that, and I'm sure I'll get bashed for this, but I really think that everyone who is alive right now, we are really lucky to be alive in this moment. And it's much like when you think about your own process, right? You went through all of these horrible things. And what happened after that? You probably did a lot of masking and avoiding. And then what? You had to deconstruct, right? And
Yep.
sometimes you have
Yep.
to deconstruct in order to build a solid foundation. And that's what I see happening in our world right now. We are deconstructing left and right, putting everything out on the table, having those open conversations so we can now build a steady foundation that we've never been built upon.
No, and we're unlearning. I think the biggest way to create growth is to be willing to unlearn and relearn. And I think, unfortunately, when you live a consumer like rat race, unconscious type lifestyle, you don't give yourself an opportunity to unlearn and relearn. And I have to say, um, my biggest thing right now at a high level is, and I have to, I'm sticking with this probably, through life because it's already in my head so much lately. Knowing, knowing is so dangerous, and I never want to know. And the problem, and the reason I'm saying that is because once your brain thinks that it kind of you stop learning. Your brain thinks that, well, you know it, you don't need to learn more. And I want to transition from knowing to understanding, because when you understand, it can always change. This is the way I understand it now, but tomorrow I might understand it a different way. When knowing has like a dead end. Knowing has an end to it. And so I hope that made sense. So like I want to transition from knowing to understanding, because in relationships, when I start understanding more, when I think I know something about someone, I'm always wrong. I'm always wrong.
Same, same.
When I think I know something, but when I seek to understand, I kind of stop myself from coming to conclusions, and I ask more questions.
Mm-hmm.
And I just think it's really healthy for people right now to stop thinking they know it all, stop trying to know everything, stop trying to know, and get more in the mode of understanding. Because when you try to understand, it'll slow down your judgments, right?
Mm-hmm.
Right now, I'm at this really awesome level. I'm in public all the time. I work in hospitals, airports all day long, like two of the most
So you're
high
sick all
traffic.
the time, is what you're saying.
No, actually, I'm really healthy. I haven't been sick in a while, so it's I maybe boosting my immunities, but
Releasing all of that negativity and, yeah,
yeah,
taking care of
yeah.
yourself, keep you
But I have
healthy.
one of my observations when I'm in these public, hospitals and airports all day, every day, is my old mind would have these judgments and conclusions right when I saw people, regardless of what it was. And now I'm thinking in this one sentence in my mind, like this one concept, and it's whether you decide to wear a certain outfit or say something in public or whatever catches my attention to look on you, I want to appreciate you for being brave enough to make a choice of whatever it is. You made a choice to wear
Mm-hmm.
those shoes. You made a choice to wear that hat. You made a choice to dye your hair purple. celebrate people for being brave enough to make choices for being themselves.
Love it.
And I
Yeah.
think that's really been so helpful. Instead of thinking, oh, well, you're wearing that, I don't know, MAGA, the MAGA hat, you're wearing that because you're an ignorant Trump supporter.
It's
How do
very
I
easy to be dismissive these days,
how
right?
do how do I know that? Why don't I just say, gosh, I celebrate you and I appreciate you for making the choice to wear that hat because you made that independent choice as an individual and I respect you for that. I don't care why. And I'm not going to dive into those thoughts. And honestly, I know it sounds weird to say that, like jumping on and off of trains and getting in and out of Ubers and airports and hospitals and observing people and thinking that deep, but I swear to God, it's so helpful. Like I have
Mhm.
this like I guess my point is if you can go in public and not feel judgmental when you people watch, you know you're creating growth for yourself.
Yeah, and I think
Yeah.
too, you're really, instead of looking at people for very superficial reasons, you're looking at them for what they are, human.
Yeah.
Um,
Well, I think, and it goes back to trying to understand, and so full circle. Don't try to know what happened to you. Don't try to
Mhm.
know everything that's going on in your life. Don't think you know everything about every relationship in your life, and don't think you know about your trauma, and don't think you know about your abuse, and try to understand it. Try to understand your trauma. Try to understand your relationships. Try to understand why you treat people the way you treat people and understand why people because you start to recognize patterns of why people treat you a certain way. So try to
Yeah.
understand all of it instead of trying to know. And I think that was really helpful for me in this whole healing process is I'm really stuck on that trying to understand instead of know because when you're abused and you're looking for answers, you want to know. You want
Yeah.
to know. You're like, I want to know why this happened. I want to know why that happened. And it's a bad approach, at least for me. At least for me.
Do you think it's been more helpful or harmful for you to, and I'm sure you're doing this too, you sound like you're a very reflective person, like reflecting back on your parents and what they have been through and where they are coming from or what may have led to them abusing you. Do you find that that is more helpful for you because you have an understanding, or do you find yourself maybe having too much empathy where maybe it's a little too forgiving of what they've done? And I'm not saying that either one is right or wrong. I find myself going back and forth between those two spectrums.
So that's a great question. So I think being really empathetic and sympathetic about their abuse, I started knowing about it in high school and college. And the bad part about being informed about it at such a young age is actually my mom used it against me as her pity party, as her cry story, and kind of the poor me, and um, used that story. She never transitioned to a survivor. So her being a victim, she was always a victim, and she still probably is today. And and I got sick of the victim story, um, and that's where I started getting help and realizing that you know I'm not empathetic to it anymore and sympathetic. And that's actually why I went no contact because, yes, I was over sympathetic. Like, I was always making that excuse, like, oh, well, she comes from this. Like, she's an only child. Her parents died before she was 25. She started hanging out with the wrong crowd in high school when her mom had lupus and a disease and started doing drugs when her mom had a disease. So, yeah, but adulthood came and you chose not to deal with it in a better way. You chose not to improve. You chose not to seek help. You chose not to heal. You chose
Yeah.
not to overcome. And then by you choosing that, you shed all of that pain and negative energy onto me. And so by you preventing, like you neglecting to help yourself, fucked me. And so
Yeah.
that's where I said, I'm not going to neglect to help myself because then I'm going to fuck my children. And so I've been going to therapists for 14 years now. And, you know, yeah, I do have a routine go to shrink. But guess what? Like, when I'm feeling anxiety and I mention, I'm going to Tony, and my wife will be like, okay. So, you
First name basis.
just, I got to see Tony. Like, and I'll just tell her,
I
I'm
mean, I
going to
have
see.
to I have to laugh because I'm Italian descent, and when someone's like, "I have to go see Tony," it sounds very shady.
Yeah. Well, my Tony is my lifesaver, and he's just such a wonderful person, and he's an amazing therapist. But that's my choice, and I'm no longer sympathetic and empathetic to all of their pain and damage. And you know what? Damage people damage other people. And
Mm-hmm.
so, to answer your question, a big part of me, once I hit my late 20s, I just realized like this is their shit and they need to deal with their shit and needs to stop
Yeah.
spilling over into my life. And that it helped me build a boundary. So at some point you got to cut the cord and realize like this is my life, and if your shit's continuing to spill over into my life, go get some damn help.
Yeah, that's a great point too, and it has me thinking. I think that there is a certain age range, right? Like where you have this window of time after coming out of abuse, and it's usually in your 20s, and that's when you start to realize that maybe you have taken on some of these behaviors, and maybe you're projecting some of these behaviors. But then you have that, I hate to call it aha moment, whatever, where you wake up and you realize that, hey, I might be a fucking asshole, right? I may be doing things wrong. And it's interesting that our parents didn't have that moment, or maybe they did and they just didn't listen to it, but we have. So I'm curious to know, what were some of the more negative avenues that you went down in your 20s, and then what was that defining moment where you're like, hey, I have to get my shit together and stop being such a victim?
Yeah, I mean, honestly, you know, I was addicted to victimizing myself, and I had no idea that I did it for so long. I was a, addicted to um, putting myself eventually in the 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 front seat, in the victim seat, and it always led to me somehow, some way. And um, for a while, it led to shame because my 20s, um, there is a lot of arrogance and ignorance, and my freshman year of college, even I was partying and doing so much drugs and alcohol that um, I almost lost my athletic scholarship. I lost my academic scholarship and had to get on
Wow.
student loans. So the hey, you're an asshole kind of started in college.
Well,
Um,
good. You had yours start early. Not
yeah,
good that that happened, but
I know, and it was, I got into a bunch of fights, like bar fights, and um, taking, I guess, painkillers while you drink, and getting myself into these really messed up situations in college. But luckily, thank God, I graduated and didn't get kicked out or arrested. Talked myself out of a lot of situations with the police, but somehow, some way, never ended up spending the night in a jailhouse, and I have no idea how that happened. But I cleaned up after college, and I thought I cleaned up. When I say cleaned up, um, got a full-time job, had a girlfriend, moved out of my house, really working hard to get my shit together. But overall, just in my 20s, just addicted to victimizing myself, um, addicted to really stroking my own ego and not really knowing a lot about it. And even as recent as my early 30s, um, you realize it in the close relationships. And I think that's where the maturity evolved, is like my 20s, I had a lot of arrogance and ignorance. In my 30s, with fatherhood and being a husband, I've realized the true person you are is the person you are in your close relationships.
Mm.
everyone can be cool in public and nice at the restaurant when you go out with friends, and out in public you can be super friendly and cordial. But the real person that you are, the true person that you are, is the person that you are in the close relationships that mean something to you, whether it's your best friend or, and and not to say the quality of certain relationships define you, because again, I don't have a good relationship with my mom and my dad, and some family members, but that's my choice. Okay,
Yeah.
so my point is the relationships you choose to be in, you make a conscious choice to be in, how good you are in those relationships defines your character, because you're not going to be um, perfect in every relationship with your parents and your siblings, and everyone's going to have those challenges. But the relationships that you choose to be in, that defines your character. And I choose
Mm-hmm.
to be in a relationship with my wife, and I choose be in a relationship with a couple friends, and some of my in-laws, and that's pretty much it in a nutshell. It's my bubble's very small, and so yeah, I think people need to play when you're healing. Pay attention to the relationships that you choose to be in. Cut off whoever you want to cut off. Do no contact. Whoever you want to do that. Whatever you got to do. But once you're in the relationships that you have chosen to be in, you gauge your character by that. That's
Yeah.
who you are. If you're a shithead in those relationships, then you got to get your act together, because you're a shithead. If you're serving those people and you really love those people and you're serving them, then pat yourself on the back. I hope that made
Yeah.
sense.
Yeah, totally made sense. I'm curious to know, and hopefully you're okay with me asking this because it's something that I've reflected on a lot too throughout the years. I feel like growing up with narcissists, I felt like, and I didn't realize this in my 20s. It took me a very long time and a lot of mighty big falls to figure it out. But I found myself going in that direction. Now, I mean, now when I reflect back on it, obviously, like, didn't know at the time, but I was doing a lot of shitty things and I was being very shitty to a lot of people. But I did have a defining moment that woke me up. Now, do you feel, and I know a lot of people would probably argue this, do you feel that people who are narcissists can be healed? Or do you think it's like after you hit a certain point, it's a no go?
There's, in my personal opinion, I think it's one thing. It's one thing. It's crazy how difficult this one thing is for people, is vulnerability. That's
Preach.
it. If you
Preach.
are okay with vulnerability, and here's what I mean by that is, if you can apologize for your mistakes, if you can really, really admit your weaknesses, and I'm talking dive into your weaknesses of the shit you're not good at, the shit that you've done wrong, the shit that you've caused, and really hold yourself accountable, really, 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 really get vulnerable there. I do. I do. But
Mhm.
until, if you have narcissistic behaviors, or you're a straight up narcissist, um, it's likely that you're not good with being vulnerable. You're not
Mm.
good with admitting you're wrong. You're not good with being on the stage and people looking at you in a negative light. You're not good with the general public thinking anything negative of you. You're very, very highly concerned with image and opinions. Um, it's a very, very high maintenance mindset. Protecting your ego is a very high maintenance mindset that a lot of narcissists um, will never let go, because once you go for long periods of time of not giving a fuck about other people except yourself, you have so much shit to apologize for. You have so much shit that you've done wrong. You have so much shit you've neglected to do. And unraveling that in a narcissist's mind is like a living hell. And they would
Yeah.
literally, some narcissists rather go to the grave than unravel it.
Do you think that's an active choice though, or do you think that there just hasn't been a defining moment? Like maybe they didn't, because I
I think
really feel like you need to hit rock bottom sometimes in order to really see yourself.
it's a double-edged sword because if you're a narcissist, your mindset, follow me here, your mindset is designed for you to not hit rock bottom,
Hmm. Okay.
right? You're always protecting your ego. You're always
Yeah.
avoiding like you're always avoiding anything on you. So, um, and you can't you don't have like empathy or compassion, um, and so you can't do anything wrong. So I think there's so many narcissists who aren't capable of hitting rock bottom because in order to hit rock bottom, you have to have compassion and empathy and other characteristics that they don't really put out there. So I think the hope it's not a lot of hope for narcissists because I think there's
Yeah.
certain modules of the brain that have been deactivated for protection. And once you get so damaged, once you get so far on the damage spectrum, it's very tough to put in
To go
reverse.
back. Yeah, I wonder that too, if there is an age cutoff with it, because maybe it does start that way where there's narcissistic traits, and then you can have that moment where
Well,
you wake up. But if you're a full blown narcissist and keep going,
yeah,
yeah.
and I do think drugs and alcohol really fuck it up too for a lot of people. I do
Mm,
think like you know, your frontal like your frontal lobe and a lot of your brain modules just start breaking down and you know, there's long-term damage that you can't reverse because there's just done so much drugs and alcohol. You're never giving your mind a second to breathe
mm,
and relax and and that's another thing that meditation's done is you know like stillness and self-reflection. I think a lot of narcissists are like they're not okay with like stillness and like themselves. So there's always, if you've noticed, the narcissists that I know can't stop moving. There's always music playing. They always got to clean the house. Like there's never like it's always an anxious moment. It's not
mm.
like you can't be okay with the moment and settled with the moment. At least the narcissist that I know. So I think it's a very difficult mindset to break.
Yeah.
It's a it's it's nearly impossible. I don't have a lot of hope for narcissists.
It's hard. Well, it's hard to have that hope too when you've dealt with it, right?
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, totally. And
Yeah.
you know, I think one thing too, if you're dealing with a narcissist if you're out there and you're listening to this, I think you should really think really hard about like um, if you've been so damaged and so abused, think about this one thing, and it's actually kind of worked for me. Is grieving the death of the relationship. Not grieve. You don't wish the person dead. You don't need to wish harm on the person. You don't need to um, none of that bullshit. Just be okay with grieving the death of the relationship, the death of the spirit of the relationship, and grieve that. Feel the pain of that
Hmm.
and let it settle with you and sit with it. Because if you don't, you'll never heal
Amazing.
because you're always going to expect them to do something. You're always going to have some unrealistic expectation. That's just not how narcissists work. It's
Hmm.
just so be okay with grieving the death of the relationship and not the death of the person or wish them dead or and because I don't there was one of my narcissistic family members. I was so mad at them. I was wishing their death.
I feel
And
like a lot of us have been there. It's a very hard thing to admit because you know the humanity part of it, but I think it's easy to get there when you've had so much inflicted on you.
well, what you're doing is you're wishing the death of their spirit is what you're really doing. You're wishing that their spirit, their energy, their personality, their presence is gone from your life.
Hmm.
You don't hope that they get, I mean, depends on how angry you are, but you know, don't get yourself to a point where wish them harm, get to a point where you just you're okay with the death of the relationship, and you're okay with the death of the spirit out of your life.
Hmm.
Um, and it's a game changer.
Yeah, for sure.
I can hear.
It, oh, go ahead.
Honestly, I can hear the. I'm in the basement. I can hear the dogs and the
Oh,
kids running upstairs.
I was like, we stated up front that you have three kids. They're gonna have to get over it.
Yeah, yeah.
That's life, man. Um, so yeah, I mean, you talk a lot about health and well-being, and it seems to be something of very big importance to you, and I love that. Um, but you're also doing some really great things in the space of health and well-being, in particular for children, and I'd love for you to chat a little bit about that. Can you chat a little bit about Stand Up Our Kids?
Yeah, stand up our kids, really. My mission is to give every kid the opportunity to stand up in school, but also, through our content and our marketing and our messaging, give every kid should be able to stand up on their own. And, this whole world of anti-bullying and this new world of more people talking about abuse. Um, I think it's important to show kids how to stand up for themselves. Anti-bullying is not going to get that far. And what I mean by that is you need to root for the things that you're for instead of worrying about the things you're against, because you'll make more progress focusing on the things that you're for.
Hmm.
We're against bullying, but the more you say bullying and the more you talk about bullying, the more bullying is going to happen. We need like pro love, pro friendliness, pro kindness. And so stand up our kids is basically, you know, we want you to stand up in the classroom, but figuratively, we want you to stand up for the life you want to live as a kid. So um, I was one of those kids that was coming to school with trauma, didn't sit still. I was having an emotional response, but the school system said I had ADHD. So now I'm in trouble because I can't sit still because I have an emotional response to my trauma. And now I'm getting labeled as an ADHD kid and getting in trouble by my teachers. And my life is miserable. Third grade was miserable. And a lot of people don't
At third
realize,
grade too. Wow.
and a lot of people don't realize, like, this is what kids are going through. And they're not going to hold up a sign saying, I'm being abused. I live in a narcissistic house. They're,
Hmm.
uh, they're not going to, they're going to have an emotional response. They're going to be fidgety. They're not going to be able to sit still. And so this ADHD thing, and I'm not saying it's not real, but a lot of kids are getting mislabeled because they're having a traumatic emotional response.
Like
And so
overdiagnosed.
if
Yeah.
if I can help these kids just by getting them off the ADHD radar, by putting some standing desks in their classroom, our mission is doing a great job, because I'm not saying ADHD is not real, but we need to take it a step further. If the kid can't sit still in class, we really need to do detailed testing before we diagnose. So if I can get the kid off the radar, they put the standing desk there, the kid's fine. You can't have kids going to school 7 hours a day, and then they can't sit still, and now they're in a treatment program on medication, seeing a therapist, blah, 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 blah.
And they already have things wrong at home, and now they're
And
being
there, yeah,
told
and
that
now,
they have a label, and yeah, it's
exactly, now they have a label. Now we're focusing on stuff that's not the root cause. We're misaligned. Now the kids got shame. It turns into a big mess. And so Stand Up Our Kids is just a movement. We sell standing desks to schools, and it's just our one piece of the pie, our contribution to help kids in school, like I said, get off the radar. It's something that's healthy, right? You should be standing up more often. We don't want kids being sedentary. We want kids being more active. Um, so that's really what the movement's about. And um, yeah, I'm excited because we've put product in 9 states. We've been in business for about 2 years, and
awesome.
we're changing kids' experience in the classroom. And if I can help in that way and make an impact, then it just helps me in my own recovery.
Yeah, that's
So,
amazing. What are some of your goals for the end of or going into the end of this year and going into next year?
so we just found a new partnership. and thank God it's here in Colorado. My first manufacturer was in China. My second manufacturer was in Florida. Um, Both great products, but I'm very strict on what I want to do, and so I've cut ties with those manufacturers. And I was lucky enough to find someone here in the Denver area, and I just like the fact that I can meet with my partner face to face, and we can work on, design strategies and marketing. And so really 2020 is going to be about this new partnership and the new products that we're going to bring to the table. And we're going to have more of a wider marketing strategy instead of just talking about just desks. We're going to talk a little more about what are the things I was telling you, keeping kids off the ADHD radar, and encouraging kids to stand up for themselves in a positive way, and widening the marketing message a little more, and putting out a new product. So 2020 is going to be super cool. I'm super stoked about it.
I love this. I feel like every survivor that I've spoken with so far, everyone in their own individual way is creating something that they needed when they were a kid. And I think that is
Yeah,
such a beautiful thing to give
I
back.
needed a standing desk when I was a kid. Oh my gosh.
I still need a standing desk.
Third grade, sixth grade, and eighth grade. Yeah, those three grades were really miserable for me. And it was like half of it was just because I couldn't sit still.
Yeah, absolutely. So let everyone out there, if people want to find out more about Stand Up Our Kids, where can they find you?
So we got a great website. I connected to my blog. It's called standupourkids.com. And got information about the desks. I got connected to my YouTube channel. And then on Instagram, it's just Stand Up Our Kids. A lot of videos, a lot of great content on there. And then Twitter is also Stand Up Our Kids. And so, yeah, check us out on our website. Go to Twitter, go to Instagram. Kind of those are the three areas that are really interactive for us. You can message us right on the website, and love to connect with anybody.
Awesome. And I'll leave all those links in the description below so you guys can check it out. We're going to wrap up in a few minutes here, but I have a couple of questions that I ask every survivor that I speak with, and I'm really looking forward to what your answers are. One of the objectives with Survivor Tribe is to put a message of healing out there, and it's very important for me to talk with people who are from all different types of backgrounds, all different levels of abuse, types of abuse, so they can chat on their healing process and what worked for them, because as you know, each individual's healing process, it's an individual process, right? Everyone's is different. So I like to ask everyone what their 5 top things are that contributed to their healing process.
Okay. Okay. So I'll say my answer is going to be in the broad spectrum of mind, body, and spirit. So my first answer is going to be, I know it sounds weird, celery juice. And that's
I've been
just
hearing
because,
so much about that.
yeah, I would, I'm only kind of going in the order of my day, I guess. So I would say the celery juice, exercise, meditation, reading, and therapy. So again, celery juice, exercise, meditation, reading, therapy. And those
Mhm.
5 things um, play a huge part in my healing. And I'm not sure at this. I know it sounds really bad to say from a survivor, but I'm kind of dependent on those 5. My goal in the next year or so is to not be dependent on them, just have them part of my life. I know that sounds,
No, that makes
um,
sense.
but I want them part of my life. I just don't want to be dependent on them. But those are the 5 pillars.
Got it. So I'm curious. We should have chatted on this earlier too, because it's something that I know a little bit about, but not much, as somatic symptoms. And you chatted a lot about how you have psoriasis.
Yes.
And I'm asking because you mentioned celery juice, and I heard that celery
Yes.
juice is really great for that. Could you like talk a little bit about that, or when that started, and what you're doing to heal that?
Yeah, I know this is also going to sound weird, but I'm lucky enough to have psoriasis because, and I got it earlier this year, like early spring. And I say I'm lucky enough to have it because um, it's my gauge, it's my temperature gauge, it's my trauma gauge, it's my stress gauge, it's my food gauge. It's literally like a built-in, thermostat.
So when your
And
shit is off, you get psoriasis.
yeah,
Wow. Okay.
and when I get a new bump, I get to assess, was it the cookie I ate? Was it the stress I had last night? Was it the fact I haven't worked out in 2 days? And I've grown to love it. I know it sounds really strange, but it's I'm lucky enough to have this gauge, um, and I didn't feel that way a few months ago.
Yeah.
So I'm definitely evolving quickly here, um, because the mindset is working, right? So when I do pay attention to the gauge, and then I put in a behavior or an improvement or make a change, or I notice it. So it works.
Yeah,
So
I personally I get patches of eczema, but I've
yeah,
never really noticed that in terms of like connecting that with mind and body in terms of like how I'm feeling or if I'm really stressed out or what I'm eating. So, what would be your recommendation for people out there who may be experiencing some level of somatic symptoms? Like, what do you think that they should do?
I think you should pay attention to the combination of stressful chemicals like cortisol combined with shit foods, because I think that combo is a horrible combo for the human body, and I think it creates everything from obesity to
Mhm.
psoriasis to eczema to skin problems to joint inflammation. So I gauge two chemicals: the food and liquids that are going in my body, and the stress chemicals. And if I can keep the stress chemicals down and the shitty processed foods and shitty foods down, um, I'm way better. I'm way better. And celery juice on an empty stomach um, is difficult in the beginning, but I do it 6 to 7 days a week,
Yeah.
and on an empty stomach in the morning, and it works miracles. And I'm gauging my stress chemicals and keeping my stress levels down. And as soon as I feel anxiety, I take deep breaths. So just really gauging that. And if you can gauge that over long periods of time, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 months, I guarantee you'll feel and see some results.
Yeah, I like that you touched on stress and how it correlates to the cortisol. Is that what the word
Yeah,
is?
it's just cortisol is the stress chemical.
Yeah.
It's really bad and impactful.
Yeah, and I definitely have issues with it. What do you do to maintain that stress or like to help alleviate your stress when it comes up and it's affecting those levels?
I have to work out, um, definitely every day, in the morning, preferably, or in the night is fine. Um, and really breath work, really focus on my breath work and focus on my meditation at night. And if I focus on those few items, um, because the meditation at night is kind of like a reset, and I can feel all the tension leaving. I can consciously feel the tension leaving my body. And I recommend meditation to anyone in any format, 2 days, 2 minutes at a time, sleep meditation, in your car, whatever kind of meditation, just do some. And I think you'll notice a difference. At least for me, it's really worked.
Yeah, meditation's been really great for me too, as well. And if you guys are interested in getting started with meditation, but you're not really sure, there's tons of apps out there, really great apps that can help you get started. Calm is one, Headspace is
Yep,
another. I would
exactly.
definitely check those out because meditation it feels so weird at first when you start doing it. You're like, what the hell? This doesn't even feel like I'm doing anything. But I promise you, it does really, really help with stress levels and
Yeah,
sleeping. It helps with a number of things.
for
One other
sure.
question that I do have for you is, I think that there are a lot of people out there who are not going to be receptive to survivors, are not going to want to hear them. That is what it is. But there are a lot of people out there who do want to offer comfort and support and have a survivor in their life that they love. What would be your one piece of advice to people who have a survivor in their life?
That's a great question, because I can sit here and tell you be empathetic and compassionate, and just be that and just do that. But I think um, it's more than that because a lot of people aren't able to show the right compassion or the right empathy because they just don't know what that person's been through.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so I will say if you have a survivor in your life, um, ask more questions and maybe go to that mindset I was telling you, talking about before, of try to be more focused on understanding than knowing. Because once you think you know a survivor, um, you'll probably uh, have some challenges because they're just living a unique life and a unique mindset that you just might not, you really can't get a full grasp on. But if you have a mindset of trying to understand, you might be prone to asking more questions. And I've just, as a communicator, I believe questions are so much more healthy. And so when you have a survivor in your life, ask more questions, try to understand more. And you think you understand today, and then tomorrow there's going to be more questions, and try to understand tomorrow. But never think you know. I think in general in life that's just dangerous, anyways, but it's really dangerous as a survivor because for me, you know, I had, I think I know about myself, and I think this is for everyone. You think you know about yourself, and then you learn something new, so treat yourself that way too. If you have a survivor in your life, right, the way you treat that survivor should also be the way you treat yourself, right? So if you're asking more questions about your survivor partner or survivor friend, maybe those are questions you need to ask about yourself, right?
Interesting.
And because there's a lot of people that actually, like I said before earlier in the interview, that they don't even know they've been psychologically abused, or they don't know that they've been exposed to some trauma. And yeah, and that's another thing I'll say too, is if you have a survivor in your life, maybe they're going through something that you need to go through. Maybe they're getting in touch with something that you've never been in touch with, and that's trauma, right? A lot of people, trauma takes work. It's deep, it's difficult, it's hard to comprehend. But once you start tapping into it, you evolve into a better person. You evolve into a more improved person. You evolve into a more true, genuine person. And I think a lot of people go through this life thinking that they have never been exposed to trauma. They've never been traumatized. They don't, and they don't even know what trauma is. They think that's for someone who goes to Iraq and fights a war. And it's
Yeah.
just, it's crazy to me. So if you have a survivor in your life, ask more questions and think about what trauma really is to you.
Love it. Absolutely love it. I have one question left for you, and I like to
Okay.
put everyone on the spot with this. What do you feel at this point in your life has been your biggest contribution to the world?
My biggest contribution to the world are my three kids because eventually one day they're going to be adults in society, and hopefully my goal is to create three good adults that are good human beings that continue contributing. But as of right now, those three kids have put so much love and positive energy and so much inspiration and just so much good energy into the world. So those three kids, that's what I have to give so far.
Awesome. Well, I have no doubt in my mind that you're creating some really great humans right now.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Oh, awesome. Derek, thank you so much for joining Survivor Tribe today, and also being incredibly brave and sharing not only your story, but your thoughts on life and healing. It's been great, and you are a true warrior.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me. I love your show. I love your
Thank
cause, and
you.
I'm looking forward to continuing to support it.
Awesome. Thank you so much. And you guys can find out more about Derek and Stand Up Our Kids by visiting standupourkids.com. And you can connect with Derek on Instagram, Twitter, YouTube, and Facebook. And you can also check out his podcast. I'll leave all of those links below in the description. Man, you are one busy guy.
You know what? As soon as we're done here, I'm gonna go upstairs and start my day with the kids and hang out and start my Saturday.
Right now, the true day begins. Uh,
Exactly. Awesome.
awesome. Well, thank you so much again for joining us. And thanks for everyone listening in. And until then, see you next time.